Hola, piloncillos. Welcome back to the 15th episode of the Offerings of Copal podcast. This is your host, Cihua Mazatl. Happy Mexica New Year! Or is it? Today, we're diving into something that, for many of us, is deeply personal, deeply frustrating, and at times completely existential crisis inducing the Mexica calendar. Now, you're going to want to light some copalito for this one. You might be able to hear it crackling. Let me see if I can get it. Every year, like clockwork, conversations resurface about how to determine the correct date for the Mexica New Year. For some of you, this may be all completely new, and maybe you didn't know that there is actually a very, very heated debate around when the actual Mexica New Year is. And, well, some follow the Arturo Meza count, while others hold that Alfonso Caso's work aligns more accurately with historical records, living traditions, and communities that still use the tonal powali. Now, for some, it may be new that there's actually different counts and correlations, and there's more than just the two that I've mentioned. These discussions can become intense, sometimes even divisive, but what if instead of fighting over who is right, we explored how we can engage with these systems in a meaningful way? Because if we're not using the calendar to align with something bigger than ourselves, what's the point? Now, I've had my tonalamat done in both the Caso count and the Meza count. I personally identify more with Mezas, but I honor both. I've made art for both of my tonales. And I don't feel the need to tear someone down over which count they follow. But I have gone through my own existential crisis because of this. And I'm not alone in that. And for some of you that know me more personally, know that this is like very real. But many of us long to practice things exactly as they once were, undiluted, untouched by modern influence. We want to do things right. And I understand that desire because I've felt it myself very deeply. At one point, I even journeyed with a drum, asking my ancestors how I could practice as they practiced. And the visions that they gave me, what I saw was a village near the sea where inside of a hut, two ancestors, one was tattooing the other. And even as I speak it now, I could see it so vividly. Showed me a day in their life. They walked me through everything they did in a single day. And it was so laborious. Every action was embedded in its own time, its own reality, its own way of being. At the end of that journey, they told me, see, it can't be as it was. It is no longer this time. And they were so loving and kind in showing me this. But I was left with a profound grief, but also an understanding. My time is now. Our time is now. And while we cannot return to that world, we can adapt and we can honor what once was in a way that still makes sense for the world that we live in. So today, I want to explore this from different angles, not to debate, but to open the conversation. Let's talk about scholars, indigenous traditions, spirituality, gatekeeping, and how we navigate these discussions without losing sight of what actually matters. And you'll note that my tone in this discussion is not a divisive one. I actually think that, and I want you to notice the conversations that are happening around you that are divisive. Those conversations are the same expression, the same energy, a different expression of that divisiveness that is currently one of the bigger factors keeping us from progress as human beings. And you'll see that energy expressed in many different ways in our society. And this is another example of how we create this division. Well, here we go. Let's get into it. First, let's break down the two most well-known correlations, Alfonso Caso's and Arturo Meza's. Now, Caso was a renowned Mexican archaeologist who, in the 1960s, proposed a correlation that does not include a leap year. According to his work, the Mexica calendar began on February 13th in the Julian calendar, which today would be around February 23rd in the Gregorian calendar. His work was based on colonial records, specifically post-conquest documents where indigenous scribes recorded dates side by side with European ones. His work is the foundation of what most academics and historians today consider the quote-unquote correct correlation. On the other hand, Arturo Meza's count emerged from a different approach. Originally, Meza followed Alfonso Caso's tables, but as he dug deeper, specifically into oral traditions, he realized that the way colonial documents presented time didn't match what was remembered by indigenous elders. In his book, The Caupohualli, Collar de Turquesas, Engarzado con Oro de Sol, Meza explains that merely running the 260-day Tonalpohualli cycle without interruption, without respecting the Nemontemi, and without considering the full 365-day year led to a misalignment of 13 days every 52 years. This misalignment, he observed, was not just an academic concern, but a break from traditional understanding passed down in oral traditions. His system integrates the Nemontemi, the 5 extra days at the end of the year, which he argued should not be counted in the Tonalpohualli. He noted that these days were considered sacred and distinct from ordinary counted days. And for those that are listening on Tuesday, March 11, today is the final day of this Nemontemi. So, as he noted that these days were considered sacred and distinct from ordinary counted days, something referenced in colonial era sources like those of Fray Diego Duran, where they were called unlucky or without a sign and number. However, Meza argues that these were misunderstood by early Spanish chroniclers who failed to grasp their significance in the larger cosmological system. Meza's fieldwork, conducted over a decade in Puebla, Tlaxcala, Veracruz, and the state of Mexico, involved gathering accounts from elders who still retained elements of pre-Hispanic timekeeping. He specifically cites oral traditions from Nahua-speaking communities in the Sierra Norte de Puebla, as well as insights from the Totonac and Otomi elders who still follow certain seasonal ceremonies tied to agricultural cycles. These communities maintain fragments of the old timekeeping traditions, particularly in relation to ceremonies for planting and harvest, aligning with the larger Mesoamerican concept of cyclical time. He and his group found that communities recognize these 5 days as days of reflection, transition, and energetic shifts, days that weren't ignored, but rather treated with specific reverence. In conversations about the Mexica calendar, I often see people referencing the fact that some living indigenous groups still use the Tonalpohualli today. The Ayuk, or the Mije people of Oaxaca, and the Quiche of Guatemala, who follow a continuous count without a leap year. There are also individuals today, some scholars, some from indigenous communities, who argue that their count aligns with the pre-colonial way of marking time. I follow 2 young women on TikTok who use this count, one of whom is Alfonso Caso's granddaughter, and I genuinely appreciate their work, even if it differs from what I follow. This brings up an interesting question. Is one count more legitimate than the other simply because it is used by a living tradition? And if so, how do we account for the other living oral traditions of Mexica-descended communities that remember the calendar differently? One thing I deeply respect is that indigenous knowledge is not static. It is alive, it evolves, and it responds to the world around it. So, when we engage in these discussions, I think it's important to recognize that multiple perspectives can coexist without negating each other. At the same time, there's also the question of place. Many argue that different regions had slightly different ways of marking time because the calendar was deeply tied to local energy, geography, and celestial alignments. If we acknowledge that timekeeping was connected to the land, then it stands to reason that there wasn't one monolithic way of tracking time across all of Mesoamerica. This doesn't mean that anything goes, but it does mean that there was and is variation in how communities approach the calendar. This is why I think it's essential to respect both living traditions and reconstructed knowledge. The fact that we even have multiple ways to explore the system is a testament to its resilience. Whether we follow a living count or a reconstructed one, what matters most is that we are engaging with these teachings in a way that is meaningful, intentional, and in alignment with our surroundings. There is also a tension between academic scholarship and spiritual practice. Scholars want to establish factual accuracy. They are trying to reconstruct what was historically practiced using written records, archaeology, and comparative anthropology. But when it comes to spirituality, we're connecting to something unseen. And that's where scholars and practitioners often clash. It's not uncommon to hear scholars dismiss certain practices as New Age or inauthentic. And yes, we do have to be mindful of how modern spirituality has been shaped by outside influences. But at the same time, to our ancestors, knowledge wasn't just about what could be documented, it was about what was experienced. One thing that often goes overlooked is that phenomenology or direct experience was a cornerstone of indigenous understanding. The way people experience celestial events, seasonal shifts, and personal visions all played a role in how time was interpreted. This means that while scholarship is valuable, it is not the only valid way to access knowledge. Spiritual experience also holds weight, even if it can't always be quote unquote proven. And let's be honest, most scholars rely on colonial era records to reconstruct the past, but those records were filtered through Spanish perceptions. The friars and chroniclers were often outsiders attempting to make sense of a worldview they didn't fully understand. Meanwhile, indigenous people were passing down their own knowledge orally, adapting where necessary, but still maintaining core elements of their traditions. This isn't to say that scholarship has no place. It absolutely does. But it's important to recognize that when we approach something like the Tonalpowali, we're not just looking at a historical artifact. We're engaging with the living system, one that is meant to be experienced, not just studied. To some, this might sound unscientific, but how many of us have had moments where we felt time moving differently? How many of us have experienced synchronicities, dreams, or messages that aligned with the energies of a specific day? These are things that scholars can't quantify, but they are just as real for those of us who walk this path. I believe that both perspectives, the academic and the experiential, can coexist. Instead of seeing them as opposites, what if we saw them as complementary? Scholarship provides structure, historical context, and comparative analysis. Lived experience provides depth, intuition, and spiritual connection. If we can hold both, we can gain a fuller understanding of what this calendar really means, not just as an intellectual exercise, but as something we live and breathe. We say we want people to reconnect, but do we actually make it easy for them to do so? Learning about our traditions requires scouring through books, elders, and whatever scraps of knowledge are available. And then, once people do find something, we tell them they aren't doing it right. That they aren't indigenous enough, that they don't belong. This creates a cycle of exclusion that is harmful. We push people away when they are trying to learn, while at the same time lamenting that our traditions are being lost. And then there's the negativity that comes with engaging in anything Mexica. We've all heard it. Not all Mexicans are Aztec. You're not even from that region, etc., etc., etc. And yes, those statements may be true, but for many people, this is the starting point. If we keep pushing people away, what are we left with? I understand the need to protect knowledge, to prevent it from being diluted or misused. But I also think we need to ask ourselves, how are we contributing to being gatekeepers to our own people? There's also the issue of how hard it is to even find this information in the first place. It's not like you can just walk into a library and find an easy to read guide on how to integrate these systems into your life. The knowledge is fragmented, hidden, or locked behind academia. We shame people for not knowing while making it nearly impossible for them to access what they need to know. And if someone does step forward to share knowledge, they're often met with skepticism, dismissal, and outright hostility. At the end of the day, we all agree that colonialism fractured our connection to ancestral knowledge. So why do we let debates about calendar dates divide us further? Yes, indigeneity is not a monolith, and we should heed living tribes and fight for their rights and land sovereignty. But the more we are allowed to learn and connect, the more we can reconnect with the earth, which to me is the most fundamental thing we've lost sight of. It is wrong to keep people from connecting with the earth. We are all indigenous to the earth, and sometimes labels get in the way of that. Like, yes, fuck colonialism, but we have bigger existential threats. The environment is collapsing. Extractive capitalism is still exploiting indigenous people and lands. Instead of arguing over who is doing it right, maybe we need to refocus on the fact that our ancestors were earth connected people. And even if we romanticize them sometimes, let's not forget that they were also capitalists and colonizers in their own ways. But y'all aren't ready for that conversation. Our ancestors knew how to move with the cycles of the earth. And when I say our ancestors, I mean all of our ancestors. Like, you go back far enough, like they were connected to the earth. And they knew how to listen to the land, how to honor the elements, and how to live in a way that was reciprocal rather than extractive. But at some point, they lost sight of that. And I believe that they're coming back and they're telling us in our ears to not repeat their same mistakes. For those, I don't know, something that I learned in my time in Teotihuacan was that Teotihuacan, which was the name given to the people that lived there 500 years before the Mexica even came, so those Teotihuacan is a Nahuatl name given to the people there, but they found this beautiful land and they saw an opportunity to gain control in a lot of ways by monopolizing the obsidian trade. And they started to create a civilization living that had towns and little pueblecitos within this big old city of different regions all over the Anahuac. They had a Mayan, they had a Maya town. They had all sorts of different people living in this big old city. And the beautiful thing that attracted everyone there is actually part of what caused those people to flee and abandon that city because they overforested that land and it no longer rained. And their ecosystem, they lost sight of that as well. Our people have always been nomadic for a reason, to live with the land, by the land, right? And so I really do feel that ancestors are trying to come back and teach us to reconnect with the earth, to move with the land. If we could find our way back to that, then maybe we'd have a chance of healing not just ourselves, but the planet as well. So, as we wrap up, let's bring it back to why we even started this discussion: the Mexica calendar and the new year. For those of you that follow the Meza account, happy Mexica New Year. May this next cycle bring you alignment, clarity, and deeper connection with yourself and the cosmos. Next week, I'll be making some predictions for the new year based on the energies of the Tonalpawali. So if you know your tonali, keep tuned for that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I've never done that before, so I'm really excited to see what I channel and what comes through. I also want to take a moment to thank those of you who have given such thoughtful and positive feedback. I see your messages, your comments, and your support. It truly means a lot. And thank you to those that have gotten a copy of the Sacred Count Agenda. And for those of you who may disagree with me, I welcome your perspectives respectfully. Let's keep these conversations open and constructive. Before I close, I want to acknowledge something that recently happened. Someone questioned my authority in sharing the Sacred Count agendas, arguing that their teachers have studied for 40 plus years and I'm not even 40 yet. So what do I know? Right. And to that, I say, where are these teachers? Are they sharing their knowledge? Do they have a platform where they make this information accessible? Because we've already spent 500 years in the dark, and I refuse to contribute to keeping it there. If I can provide tools and a service for self betterment, then I will. And what's crazy to me is that I'm out here trying to do something positive. If it helps you to believe today is a Sipakli day and it helps you move through something, give you the strength to persevere and move through something that is difficult, then what else do we want and need? Did could it have been an Osomatli day or another day? I trust that the people that need to hear the message at the right time, at the right moment, will come. And that's what that's about. My goal is not to claim ultimate authority, but to keep this wisdom alive in practice and accessible to those who feel called to it. So whether you follow the Meza count or the Caso count or another system altogether, my hope is that you are using some system to reconnect to time, to the cosmos, and to yourself. And I'll also add this, that the more that I've walked this path, the more I realize, the more encounters I have with individuals, elders, scholars, and people who all believe that they are the ones that have the right answer. And so I think my ultimate answer is that nobody truly knows, and that truth is subjective. Does your experience matter? Yeah. Your personal experience matters and it matters to you. We can learn from each other, but it isn't the only truth. And there are so many truths. And most of all, at the end of the day, everything is made up. It's all made up, Piloncillos. Someone at some point was like, you know, it would be really helpful if we had some sort of system to keep track of time and organize our days. Or it would be so lovely if we could pay honor and homage to this or to that. All rituals, all of this stuff is invented and made up by someone at some point in time. Whether it was dictated by the stars and observable cycles, or it was the grand vision of an artist, who cares? Respectfully. I mean, we care, but it's it's alive now and it's going to evolve, like it or not. So how do we keep its essence alive and going? I don't know. This is just some food for thought. I'm curious to hear what you think about all of this, but I love having these conversations with you all. And if you'd like to take things further, I offer personal Tonalamat readings to help you integrate this knowledge into your life. If you want to hear about the count, this information, it's your choice. At the end of the day, these are tools. And you get to choose how you want to use them, how you want to integrate them into your life. So, crisis averted. Also, I have tarot reading subscriptions for those who want regular check ins with spirit And since we're entering a new Mexica year, I'm also offering year ahead readings. So if you're curious about what this cycle has in store for you, check out the links in the show notes. Now, the Mexica New Year's reading, we go through every single ventana, and I give you insights on the trecenas, the ventanas, and pretty much what I see in the cards that are going to be coming up for you in the year. And I always love doing these readings. Always have such great positive feedback from these, and I love to continue your journey. So if you booked last year and you're booking this year again, thank you. And for newcomers welcome. And most of all, Tlasokamati for being here. Until next time, piloncillos, stay sweet.